Standing or sitting in the aisles is not permitted. Smoking is not permitted inside any building on Brown's campus. In the event of an emergency, please walk calmly and quickly to one of the marked exits and move away from the building. Thank you for your cooperation.
Okay, welcome everybody. It's so great to see you here at today's event, Equitable and Inclusive Leadership in Higher Education, a conversation with Melissa Nobles and Richard Locke. This is a keynote event that celebrates the inaugural year of the Faculty Leadership Program, an effort jointly supported by the Provost, the Dean of the Faculty, and the Vice President for Research. I'm Jill Pfeiffer, the Vice President for Research, and I'm also a mathematician here at Brown. And I'll try to stand a little farther from the mic. The Faculty Leadership Program was created and designed by Amy Carroll in the Office of Research and Ann Wyndham in the Dean's Office to support faculty to become leaders in their departments, in research centers, in the community, and in their profession, and to help Brown execute its mission of excellence and inclusive shared governance. This program provides associate and full professors experiential learning and leadership skills while supporting cohort networking and ongoing professional development beyond the formal program period. So I'm going to start by introducing our inaugural faculty cohort. And I'm going to say the names of everybody, and then afterwards maybe you could all rise and get some applause for your work. So our first cohort today is Katie Biello, Associate Professor of Behavioral and Social Sciences, Keisha Blaine, Professor of Africana Studies, Professor of History, Rebecca Carter, Associate Professor of Anthropology and Urban Studies, Eric Darling, Associate Professor of Medical Science, Pathology and Laboratory Medicine, Françoise Hamlin, Associate Professor of Africana Studies and History, Meredith Hastings, Professor of Environment and Society and Earth, Environmental and Planetary Sciences, Carla Kahn, Associate Professor of Neuroscience. Oh, great, a nice short title there. Nancy Kallick, Associate Professor of Religious Studies, Associate Professor of History, Carolyn Clivens, Associate Professor of Applied Mathematics, Brandon Marshall, Professor of Epidemiology, Benoit Posséder, Professor of Mathematics, Andrew Peterson, Associate Professor of Engineering, Emily Rauscher, Associate Professor of Sociology, Brenda Rubenstein, Associate Professor of Chemistry, Associate Professor of Physics, and Suresh Venkatasubramanian, Professor of Data Science and Computer Science. So please rise and join me in acknowledging and celebrating Okay, it's my great pleasure to introduce our provost, Rick Locke. Rick Locke is the Schreiber Family Professor of Political Science and International and Public Affairs and Brown University's 13th provost. As the university's chief academic officer and chief budget officer, Rick Locke works closely with the president to advance the university's synergistic mission of teaching, service, and research. The provost is responsible for ensuring academic excellence and sound budgetary practices across the full range of programs in academic departments, research centers, interdisciplinary institutes, oversees the operations of the college, the graduate school, Warren Alpert Medical School, School of Public Health, School of Engineering, and School of Professional Studies. Rick has been a strong advocate for this faculty leadership program and for faculty development opportunities more generally, so we're just thrilled to have him here to participate in today's event.
Hi everyone, it's really great to see all of you, and congratulations to the first cohort of this faculty leadership program. It's really wonderful to see you, and this is an especially great event. I've known Melissa for many years, and it's wonderful to be able to host her back at Brown. I'd also like to thank everyone who made this event happen and this program happen. So Office of Vice President of Research, Faculty Affairs Office and the Dean of the Faculty's Office, the Office of the Provost, events, catering, etc. These events just don't happen by themselves, and so I really want to thank everyone here for their great work. I can't think of a better person to sort of kick off this event than Chancellor Melissa Nobles, who is a wonderful friend and former colleague. I've known her since she was in graduate school. I was actually on the search committee that recruited her to MIT, and we were colleagues for a really long time in the political science department, course 17, not 18. She's just an incredible colleague, and as you'll hear later on today, she's just an amazing leader. So let me just tell you a little bit about Melissa, and then what we're going to do is just have some sort of questions that I'll kick off, and then open it up for sort of more general conversation. So Melissa serves as MIT's Chancellor, and she's been serving in that role since August of 2021 and is also the class of 1922 professor of political science. Now, because we have the term Chancellor at Brown too, which means the head of our board of trustees, at MIT it's a slightly different role, which means the Chancellor is in charge of all things having to do with students. So it's a huge job. Undergraduate students, graduate students, res life, but also the Chancellor plays a central role in the academic leadership. So sits on the council that determines faculty appointments and strategic directions and resource allocation. So it's a really huge responsibility. Prior to becoming Chancellor, Melissa held other leadership roles at MIT. She served as the Dean of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences from 2015 to 2021, and the head of the Department of Political Science. So at MIT you don't call departments chairs because that would sort of imply a democratic structure, but rather heads as sort of a section head of a factory. Literally, that's what where it comes from. And so she has served as I was the head of the Department of Political Science just before Melissa, and it's just the structure of the place. It's a wonderful place, notwithstanding these foibles. Prior to serving as the head of the department, she served as the associate chair of the MIT faculty. So more or less like our FEC here, but there's a very, very important role. Aside from being an incredible leader and a really gifted teacher, Marissa is really a high-impact scholar. She is the author of several books. The first one is called Shades of Citizenship, Race and the Census, which is really a path-breaking work showing how race is not a fact but an artifact, and an artifact that is defined differently through time in the same country and across space, across different countries. And even today in the meeting I just had about what are we going to do once the Supreme Court rules against affirmative action, we were talking about some of the insights from that book. She also is the author of a terrific second book, The Politics of Official Apologies, and is a co-author with Margaret Burnham, and they have this Burnham Nobles Digital Archive, which is housed at Northeastern's University Library. And this is just this incredible, I remember when you started this project, that basically is a digital resource dedicated to identifying, classifying, and providing factual information and documentation about anti-Black killings in the American South from 1930 to 1954. It's an incredible resource, and it's connected to Melissa's research on restorative justice, which is sort of historical and a comparative project in light of ethnic and racial conflict. So as you can see, an incredible institutional leader, an incredible scholarly leader, and we didn't talk about it here, but I know from my past experience, an incredible teacher. We are particularly happy to have Melissa as a Brown alumna speaking today. She earned her BA in history from Brown and then her MA and PhD from Yale University before we were lucky to bring her to MIT in 1995. So Melissa, why don't you come and join us on the stage and we can begin the process.
great.
It's great to be back with you,
to have
Rick.
you back. And what I didn't mention is Melissa also serves on the board of governors of the Watson Institute. So we were actually here only a couple weeks ago.
Right, exactly.
So, one of the things, I'm just going to ask a couple questions just to kick it off, and then we can open it up, Melissa. But, you've had this incredible leadership trajectory from, sort of faculty governance, department chair, dean, and now chancellor. And I wonder if you can sort of just start us off by talking a little bit about what are the kinds of values that you see that you bring to these different leadership positions, and why are those values so important?
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rick. And good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be back at Brown. So I thought about this, and I thought about how I generally approach, for example, our senior team meetings, just as a way of kind of contextualizing that question. So it had me think a bit, reflect on my behavior and kind of how I approach senior team meetings. So that's when all of us meet, President, Provost, other members of the senior team, to discuss any number of issues that are happening on campus. So I try to come to it with these qualities in mind. One is that I try to be as open-minded as I can be about anything. Whatever the issues are, you don't know all of what is behind them. So rather than form of an opinion, you try to be as open-minded and think about all of the positions of the offices of everyone who's sitting in the meeting, those who are in the meeting and those who are not, kind of how whatever the issues we are discussing are likely to affect them. So thinking deeply about that, as well as closely listening, because we are a team, of course, and this extends not only to senior team meetings, but any meeting. You have to listen closely to what people are saying and sometimes what they're not. And sometimes if you have some back information or a deeper understanding of an issue, you are better able to understand what is being said. I think about how to be collaborative and how to contribute. So sometimes just thinking always about how I can find ways to move us to a deeper understanding of the issue, so that you may have, and typically they're crises. So the goal, you're trying to solve the crisis, right? Which you do have to do. But you also have to think about what's behind the crisis. And sometimes it's difficult to do that in the moment, but you can't lose sight of that, because if you don't figure out, at some point, take time to figure out what's behind the crisis, it will come again. And I think about how to contribute. So sometimes in a meeting, I will take an approach which is meant to support what I hear. Like, I think that's a good way that we're heading. Or I will respond by challenging it. Like, I'm not so sure. And I'll be upfront about that. I don't want to leave a meeting with my opinion and my voice having not been heard. Because it cannot be leaving the room and then talking about, I didn't know. No. That's why you're in the meeting, right? So no secrets, no whatever. Lay it on the table, which leads to the third, be direct. I believe in speaking plainly, directly, but respectfully. Because if you disrespect someone in a meeting, you've lost them. They're not listening to you because they're thinking about that disrespect that you just did. Right? So, and being respectful doesn't mean agreeing with everyone every time. It doesn't mean always being always polite in one's presentation of things. You don't want to be, like just unnecessarily rude and make enemies, antagonize people. But sometimes, you can't, the issues may make that impossible. But you always have to be, I think, respectful. Then finally, I'd say three things. I try to keep the principles close, meaning never losing sight of what the big picture is. So let's say the goal is to advance the community. Whatever the goal is, you don't want to do anything in the meeting, either the process or the decision, which undermines that goal, because then you're spending the rest of your time trying to correct. And then being decisive as it requires. Sometimes, you do have to go back on things or kind of rethink things, and you can't be afraid of having to do that, or having to apologize, or having to say, I was miscited, or I misunderstood, or da-da-da. You have to be able to say that, or else, I don't know, how can anyone have any confidence in you? Because you're not omnipotent, you don't know everything, right? And then, as you know, Rick, I like to laugh and joke. I like to see humor in things. And in most meetings, I'm going to find a way to work in a joke, because otherwise the meetings get too heavy and you sometimes lose perspective there, right? And so you say, okay, people, I know this is heavy, this is whatever, but there are other things, or there's something funny in this. And sometimes the humor will be just self-deprecating. Sometimes it will be not about the room, who's in the room, but the situation that makes it funny. So I try to bring that to bear, just to bring some levity when appropriate. Now, obviously, if it's quite solemn, I'm going to do that. But in the ordinary course of a day, there ought to be a reason to laugh. Hopefully. If I'm in a job where I can't laugh, that's a problem, okay?
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
One of the things that, what we're trying to do in this program and in this whole series is really think about, how does one develop as a leader?
Yeah.
What's the mix of skills or attributes, and especially if we're trying to develop a different kind of leader, a more inclusive, principled leader. And we try to do that with our students in our classes, or engaging with them through programs like this. We're trying to do it with our faculty colleagues as well. And I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit about your own sort of trajectory, going from, when you were a student here through where you are now. Like, what were the kind of key moments when you started to develop a certain set of skills? What were they? Sort of maybe decision points where you said, yeah, I think I'm going to go for this, instead of like, oh, I'll write another article instead.
Right. Yeah. So, well, first I was a student. When a student here, I was a bit of an activist. So it's kind of funny now that I'm dealing with students. I'm like, oh, I'm back, right? I'm like, I see students. I'm like, that's me. So I was a bit of an activist, and I learned a couple of things from that. Some of the sensibilities that I brought to that, I actually kind of had when I was a kid, growing up. I'd always been interested in leadership. I became of age, just without digressing too much. But I was born at a time. My parents moved to New York from the South. They'd both been raised, and they weren't particularly involved in the civil rights movement, but they were supportive of it. So they moved, I was raised in New York, and so I was of age when, King was dead, Martin Luther King was dead, Malcolm X, but they were still part of how Black Americans discussed what it meant to be Black American. And I would sit and watch. There was a show on local New York news called Like It Is by Gil Noble, and it was, I never forget, no relation. And they would be talking about, okay, what post-civil rights, which way Black America? And I would watch it, and what I found interesting about it were two things, and it relates to when I got to Brown. One was they seem to be charting two different ways of how to understand the situation of Black Americans in the late 20th century. And I would watch that, and I didn't fully understand all that they were talking about, other than these were community leaders. They saw themselves interacting with the American government where power was, and they wanted to influence that power in some kind of way. And I was interested in the ways in which they used power. I was moved by their words and how they offered a vision, kind of interpretation, that helped me understand and helped me judge when I would hear my parents talk, my grandparents and uncles and stuff, who should they vote for, or how should they behave, or what does it mean. I was trying to sort all that out. So I come to Brown, and I was like, here's my time to act. Like, I'd watch these people, now I'm going to act, right? But then I had to figure out what it meant to act, right? So am I an activist? Am I protesting? Do I want to be an administrator? Do I want to be a professor? Do I want to be these things? And part of what I was doing at Brown is trying to figure that out. And so I had different roles. I was involved with the Black Student Association, which at that point was called OUAP, the Organization of United African People. And I was there. Then on the other hand, I was involved in meetings with, at that point, President Swearer and Dean Sheridan, and either working with them or screaming at them. It just depended on the day. And I was trying to figure out which kind of activist did I want to be. And I don't know that I fully understood it when I graduated, but I graduated. And I thought, okay, well, what's next? So I worked on a fellowship. It was called the cohort Foundation, and it was to promote leadership skills. When I did that, I was like, oh, maybe I'll run for Congress. I told Rick this. And I walked around. I worked for a guy who was running for state senate. His name was Galen Kirkland, and he was running against David Paterson, who ended up at one point being the governor of New York. And my candidate was bad. He wasn't going to win. And he was so desperate, they made me his campaign manager, so I knew he wasn't going to win. I learned a lot, but what I learned in that position was that I had to go around. He was running to be the state senator for the Upper West Side, including Harlem, and the Upper West Side, kind of Upper West Side, New York. And so I would go with him on his campaign stops. And we would go to these, I would be on this bus and I would see these Democratic clubs in Harlem. I never understood what the Democratic clubs were until then when I was helping him in this campaign, I finally realized what they were. That's where the Democratic Party did their grassroots organizing in Harlem. And they had, not every block, but a certain number of blocks where they could deliver the vote. So you would have to go and talk to the heads of these clubs to get their endorsements. That was the point. So I would go with him to these meetings, and he'd make his pitch, and they would ask him questions. So that gave me some insights into what it might mean to run for office. Yikes. So I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. So after that year of being in Coro, working for him, I talked to some friends who were active in Democratic politics in Harlem, and I said, could I do it? Now, the person I would have been coming up against was Charlie Rangel. Exactly. So they were like, "You're dreaming, right? Your grandmother's been here for ages, but you are from the Bronx and from New Rochelle. No, what it would take for you to kind of get what you would need and the support to go up against Rangel is impossible." So we kept it in a quiet conversation, of course, because I was nowhere near launching anything like that. But it made me think about my ambitions. It's like, so if I'm thinking about running for Congress, and I decided not to do it for all the right reasons, but it was kind of a self-awareness. Like maybe there was something that I wanted to do or an interest I had in politics. So I'd always also been interested in studying politics, and one of the professors, when I was here at Brown, one of my professors, Wilson Moses, who now, he left to go to Penn State. He studied African-American nationalist thought in the 19th century. And he called me into his office one morning at 9 a.m. He said 9, and I was so angry because what kid gets up at 9, right? He's like, "Come to my office, Melissa." I was like, so I go to his office, and he says, "You could be a professor." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, you could do that. What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm going to classes, and I'm being an activist." He was like, "You could be a professor." So I thought, okay, Professor Moses. I was flattered, and I was surprised, and I didn't quite know how to take it, but I took it in as I could at that age. And but I kept it in mind when I graduated. I had it when I was figuring out what next. So anyway, I ended up applying to grad school. Not active at all in grad school. Then I come to MIT. I'm like, what am I doing here? Seriously, right? So because it's not a liberal arts place, anything like that. It's so different from all the other places that I had been. But nonetheless, I loved it, and but I was trying to figure out how to make sense of it. So as a junior faculty member, you're trying to just get tenure. But even as that was happening, I took an interest in the department. How was it being organized? How was it being run? Who was leading it? What were the factions? Because all departments have them. Trying to just figure out, and then placing that within the context of the school, right? We're at a school, in a department at a school, at a technology school. How do you thrive? How does the department survive? How does the school get resources from the center? And how do you survive? So that was kind of in the back of my mind. It wasn't my top intellectual interest, but it was something that interested me in as much if I was going to have a future there. I needed to have some situational awareness. Then finally, I'm a black woman at MIT. So I'm trying to look around and say, if there's anybody there who has authority, who are they? Which black people, right? And how'd they get there? So one person was Phil Clay. And I spoke to him once, and he said to me, he said, Melissa, I spoke to him, well, here, there used to be a meeting of, let me back up, there used to be dinners of black faculty at MIT across the school, across the whole institute. So basically meant engineers and scientists for the most part. And I would go, and I would be in awe, and they were mostly senior people, and they would just talk to us and tell us kind of, a lot of war stories, of course, and most of us were one in our departments. Maybe someone would know that, one, I was the only, well, there were two in my department, but me and another person. But there weren't a ton of people, so you were also just looking for community and camaraderie and such. And those were very helpful for me because at least it said, okay, there's a place here. You can make it here. Not necessarily that, but they weren't. They didn't sugarcoat things about the difficulties of being there. No one was trying to say, oh, it's just great and fun and da-da-da. It was more like, just, make sure you can survive and come out whole. I looked at all of those things, and so, and I looked for people in my department, Rick being one and others, who I thought were sensible people who were open to change, or who wanted to behave decently, and who could see me for my talents, treat me like a colleague, not as an oddity, not as someone who's going to be here and not, but as a potential permanent member of the department, thought about in the ways that any of your colleagues would want to be thought of. I was just like, if we all can just do that, it'll be great. Some failed the test, but thankfully most passed. Those who failed the test, they didn't know they failed, but I just stayed away from them because they'd given me enough signals that you're not good for me. And there were others who I thought, oh, yeah, that's a good one. Those are good people, meaning there was people who I thought would be fair. Once I got tenure, I began to think, well, now I'm a full member of the department, so I expect to be asked to do things because that's what, well, even when you're untenured, I'll get to that in a moment, you expect to do things, right? So I thought, okay, yes. And people asked me, thankfully. I was like, good. And I didn't shrink from, lead a committee, yes, because I thought I could do that. When it became time to be head after Rick left, well, you kind of made me like the associate head. It was kind of, right? So I thought that was good. That was like I was in training, right? But I, just that insights, he and others, I said, okay, now you all are acting like you have some sense, meaning that, you're looking at me along with the other colleagues and making some determinations about what we can do. And you've made that determination because at least you've looked closely enough and taken me seriously enough that you can see it. I've been around some other people, they don't see it. So, I became head, which was fine. Dean, same thing. And now chancellor. And I guess what I would say about the shared, I did write some things down here. What I think about is kind of the shared themes that go across all of these things was that I was open to learning, that I realized that I kind of was honest with myself that I knew I wanted to contribute, that I wanted to be involved. I didn't shy away from it. I didn't think that it was a lesser thing to do. The department, in as much as I liked being, very much enjoyed being at MIT, being in the department, being in the school, that required that people contribute. We have a lot of expectations when we're in our departments. We want our scholarship to be treated seriously. We're expected to teach ably and competently. We're expected to do lots of things. Those things don't happen if no one puts in an effort. If you're going to grade a class or grade a student's paper, you're in it. If you're in a meeting trying to decide about tenure or not, or reading over materials, whatever that you're doing, everyone is expecting you to do your level best. That means that you're putting in, that it is a collective effort. Nobody in a department, if you want a department that gives you your best in terms of your intellectual best, you have to be willing to be a part of that. It can't, this isn't kind of like, we can't have the public goods problem where people are not doing what they want to get out of it. The department is only as good as the people are willing to make it. And so I believed in that. I thought if we want to have a good department, we're responsible for that. And everybody has to pull their weight. And I was down for that. And I wanted to be in a department, in that institution that believed that too. And I thought MIT did that. And maybe it was because, and I think it is, because of the mission of helping the world as such. There has to be some notion of contribution beyond yourself.
That was terrific. Really, really terrific sharing that story. And I guess I wanted to just connect question 1 and question 2, which is, question 1 was really about kind of values, and question 2 was about your leadership pathway. And so you're not only a super effective leader, but you're anchored in these kinds of core principles. And MIT is a complicated place, and there's a whole bunch of us who have some ties to that place. But even warm and fuzzy brown is a complicated place.
Yeah, all places.
And sometimes, so how do you actually combine these kind of core principles that drive you, that you talked about, when you were an activist, which I would say like 99% of the other students at Brown would fall into that category. And how do you combine those values with like being the effective leader? Because that sometimes is tricky.
Right. So one of the things, yeah, it is tricky. And I think how I try to do it, Rick, is I just think, okay, one of the things about activism or anything like that is you have some shared goal, right? It may be sometimes idealistic, and that's gotten toned down over the years because it gets weathered. And it gets weathered, it faces reality. That is, lots of people have different goals. And so you're trying to figure out what is the thing that we can kind of all agree on that in certain ways would be, by most measures, unobjectionable, right? Which is, okay, we want something to be better. We want at least everyone to feel that they can buy in at some level. You may not love it always, but you can live with it, like, meet some kind of basic core, and that it matters how you get to that decision. It'd be one thing if you thought, oh, I love the decision, but I hate how we got there. Then you don't really feel good about the decision. On the flip side, sometimes, you can have a great process, and you're like, how did we end up, how is it that this doesn't seem to be what we want either? So it's kind of paying attention to both whatever the desired outcome is as an objective that you want to reach, but also paying some attention to that process such that you can be, A, you can be proud of the process, B, you can defend it, and C, you can explain it in a way that doesn't require a whole lot of words, because if you're doing a whole lot of explaining, sometimes that suggests something, right? So you want to keep it plain and simple. So I think, I don't know if I'm quite answering your question, Rick, other than they always have to be going on in your head at the same time, right? When you lose, so all I can say is when I think about crises that I've seen over the years, it's because something along those two axes has gone up. It's at odds. Something didn't work, because you're looking back and you're going, okay, how did we get to that? Either we didn't consult enough people, so the process was messed up, or we were too small in our ambitions. We weren't expansive enough in what we wanted. So you get what you aim for. If you want to be big, think big. If you want to be small, think small. Nothing wrong with small. Sometimes modesty works, though, too, right? I mean, sometimes it's like, if we can just get to that.
So given that what we're doing here is really talking about also leadership in an academic context, and these are incredibly complicated times in the world and our country, and pretty challenging times for institutions of higher education. And so maybe you could share with us, what do you see as what are the biggest challenges that you see facing universities like MIT, Brown, and others? And how do we navigate those? What are the opportunities available for principled leaders and for our colleagues to try to take these challenges and do something hopefully positive with them?
Yeah, it's certainly true that we are in quite challenging times along a lot of different dimensions. And I think first is the challenges. Whether it be thinking about, how do we come out of COVID? How do we deal with that? Demands for change that, in general, are welcome, but sometimes, we have to kind of deal with change doesn't happen immediately. Kind of managing expectations such that, yes, we want change. Yes, change is possible. Truth is, change is always happening, right? But trying to find a way to manage expectations such that you can reach goals in a way that you can, kind of have them secured, and where you don't create more enemies, or not more, just more opposition. So we face a lot of times, there are demands for change. We stand up committees. You're working for change. It doesn't always seem like it's going fast enough. You meet resistance, and that resistance is sometimes just entrenched interest that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Even if it is broken, why fix it now so fast? And others who think, you're still not done fixing it, right? And so you've got all of these demands. So, part of it is just, I find, okay, this is the goal that we want to reach, folks, and we're working towards it, and you just have to help us make one step at a time. So, I guess I'm always coming up against what I would describe, and I heard another describe this as kind of the permafrost to resist, to change. It's, you may have, it's just really hard to melt. It's like there. And some of it is just the inertia of institutions. We've always done it this way. This is the way we're used to doing things. It seems to work kind of, sort of. We can kind of tinker with it. Maybe it'll change a little bit. But we just kind of want to do things the way we always have done them. And so underlying of that, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the truth is that we do have to change. Institutions, whether it be economic models have to change, how we're thinking about how we educate students has to change. A lot of things are changing, the way we organize our organizations to make them more equitable and inclusive. So I guess what I want to say is, I'm kind of rambling here in a way because it's a difficult question. But I guess my overall goal, my overall thinking is we have to believe that being more equitable and inclusive is what we want. And we want it not just because we want to feel good and this and that, but because it makes us better. And if you believe that, then that's the goal, and you have to work towards it. And the truth is, I think a lot of people believe that, and other people are skeptical. But that's the nature of democracy. I mean, that's the nature of it. Either you're in or you're out. And we can't have places where people are out. We just can't. So if that's what we want, then we do what we have to do to get there. And it may not always be fast, but the point is you need to be walking in that direction. But standing still and being obstinate won't do. Because the truth is, the ground is moving underneath your feet anyway. Because change is coming, and we all know at universities, with young people, you want to see the future, look at them.
That's great. Why don't we open it up for questions, comments from, we have an incredible group of colleagues here. And if you could just please just introduce yourselves when asking questions. And I don't even know if we need a microphone because it's a pretty small group. You can all hear us, right? Okay. But if we do need a microphone, we'll ask. So, questions, comments? Yeah.
Thank you.
Chris?
So Chris Rose, Nicholas.
Hi.
We're Paisans. So now you're chancellor.
Yeah.
And, you know, the way MIT is organized, chancellors have a certain set of responsibilities, provost and president do have other responsibilities.
Hold on a second, Chris. Do we need the microphones because it's being captured for people? Sorry about that. That was my mistake. Yeah.
So, you know, now you're chancellor.
Yeah.
What levers do you think you can pull now to affect the sorts of change that you'd like to affect?
So, thank you for that. What levers can I pull now? So, there are a lot of different ways in which I try to affect change. One is, most obviously, whenever there's any meeting now, I bring a certain sensibility to bear. Now, I have a lot in common with my colleagues about a lot of different things, right? So that's true for anything, right? We have certain, but there are meetings or there are issues when I will say something that will change it around just a little bit, make it, well, sometimes a lot. It depends on what I say and what the circumstances are, as a way of beginning to open aperture of what things mean. Right, kind of how it's likely to be understood, what the ramifications of one decision are versus another, or questioning what was the thinking that went into any given issue or statement that someone will make. I necessarily have to speak a bit cryptically because that's the nature of it, but that's one way that I affect change. One way certainly is. And this is my role as a chancellor, and I don't know if I don't know that other chancellors would have acted any differently. But since I deal with students a lot, I have to also serve as a bit of a translator to others about this is what they mean, right? And sometimes I don't always understand. So part of what I continue to do as chancellor is to learn, because there are generational differences. I mean, an activist of my year, now I'm old, I'm the chancellor. So they're not looking at me like, you're one of us. They're looking at me like, you're the administration, which is true. Right? I don't, say, no, I'm not, I'm with you. No, I say, yeah, you're right. But I'm trying to understand X, Y, and Z. Certain things I agree with you on, certain things I don't. I just don't. And I don't agree with you on it for lots of reasons. It's not just that I'm the chancellor, right? And there may be other reasons, right? And we can reasonably disagree. You all have the voice, I have the responsibility. So there are some things that I have to think about that you're not thinking about. Because when things go sideways, your parents are coming to me. So that's how I try to affect change, in as much I can provide another point of view that change. So it's kind of always like the dog that didn't bark. Like it's always like the thing that people don't see in a way that can make the difference. And certainly I think it makes a difference for colleagues who are working together who think, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And that often happens in meetings.
Great. Thank you. Other questions, comments? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Katie Biello. I'm an associate professor in the School of Public Health. Thank you for this conversation. It's been really fascinating. And I think one question I have is if you could maybe talk about a time when you've had a crisis of confidence and how you've gotten through that, and particularly as a Black woman in leadership, where there, I can imagine, feels like a lot of pressure being often one of one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've had a lot of crises of confidence over the years. So I will say this, I'll talk about them, but I will say this, they've gotten lesser as I've gotten older. Because I'm like, this is it. Right? What you see is what you're getting. When I was So I can remember lots of times, and some of it is, it's inexperience, it's youth, and it's being the only black person, and trying to sort through all of that. And I can remember one instance. I don't know if you ever heard this story, Rick. So I was a junior faculty person, and I was in a meeting with two senior colleagues, men, white men. We were working on the dissertation review committee for a woman student. And she was talking, and I asked a question and gave her a comment. And one of the senior faculty members looked at the other white senior faculty member, because it was a good point. Let me just say. The reason I'll tell you it was a good point, because this is what happened. He said, so you said da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So the other faculty member said, no, I didn't say that. Melissa said that. I'm sitting in the room. Right? So I'm like, okay, so wait a minute. So I'm in the room. I made the comment. The two white guys were trying to figure out which of the two white guys made the good comment, because they couldn't believe, apparently, that a black person could say this, a black woman. So I was like, this is like an experiment or something, except I'm in it. Then I said, okay, so at first, I'm like, all right, if I'm like seeing things like, it happens again. I said something, and the guy says, so you said, and the other one said, no, Melissa said. It was like, this was like Abbott and Costello or something, like who was on first? I was like, I'm here. So after that exchange, after I get over it, so I'm laughing about it now, but I was infuriated, and I was embarrassed, I was humiliated, and I went back to my office, and I went back to my office, and I didn't cry, but I sat and I thought, I was slamming books and, just like, what? And what was that? And after I thought about it for about an hour, I had to kind of settle myself. I got quiet and said, okay, Melissa, so now think about this. Here, you have to get some lessons from this, and you have to think about how you're going to respond. So I said, okay, first, what's the prize? The prize is tenure. These guys are voting. They let you know something right there. They don't see you. So, how are you going to get who among the senior faculty can you begin to go to? Because these two are unreliable. Right? If I'm in the room and I can't get credit, then, okay, so how are they going to evaluate me? So I thought about that. Then I thought, okay, I still have to be an advisor to this student. Now, they've completely undercut my authority. So how am I going to restore my authority with this student? So I made an appointment to see her, to say these were my points, without raising that BS that they raised, because I'm not going to honor that, but I have to kind of try to clean up the mess that they made for me. And then I decided I'm going to go to less meetings. I'm going to go to as fewer meetings that put me in the room with these people. They're going to see me on a command performance, which is when I'm prepared, when I'm steeled enough to be, when I feel. So the crisis of confidence was that experience. Going to my office was my trying to get over it and deal with it. And the third was thinking through how I was going to survive that, which I did. But there were others, but not that one. That was many years ago, and it stuck with me because it showed me a lot of things in that one interaction. And I'm sure, as it turns out, these guys, I worked with them afterwards, and they ended up, when I was head of the department, when I tell Rick later, he's gonna laugh. Well, when I was head of the department, I had to deal with them and stuff, and I worked through it. I mean, as it turns out, we were okay as colleagues. But it took like years of like their nonsense that I knew was rooted in, because they showed me racism, sexism, probably a bit of ageism, or whatever it was, or just, men, really? No, honestly, I was like, really? We're all getting paychecks, dudes. What are you talking about? I'm not, my PhD wasn't like, it wasn't an award. It wasn't like I won it in a raffle. Right? Or somehow, like, I kind of smuggled it in. Like, I don't know how she got here. It's like, that's kind of how it was. I was like, really? Yeah. So, being where I am now, right, I use it as an opportunity to, like, always be supportive of faculty who I see, women of color, people of color, untenured faculty in general, because it's just kind of nutty the way it is, right? So we're fully grown adults. In any other profession, it's a whole other deal, right? I mean, in your 30s, you're like old people, and with us, we're like, oh, we're still, So just the nature of the academy is infantilizing, right? And then you have to deal with, these men who seem to forget that they were dealing with an adult woman. I guess they thought they were dealing with some kid. I'm in my late 30s already. I'm like, really? Okay, you got me going. Sorry about that.
Meredith, and then.
I want to keep you going. So I have a more specific question in this line.
Sure.
How would you change the tenure system? Because I feel very challenged by many of the systems we have in place, we do things with our faculty where we'll say, well, let's change this one thing, right? Let's change this, we need to make this process more fair. So let's change this one thing. And then we'll take away one thing. So I'll give you the example, the GRE scores. Okay, well, here we have research that shows that this outcome is not related to, right? The score is not at all related to their success getting their PhD. So why are we using it? So let's get rid of it. Okay, well now we're going to rely more heavily on these other things that are more biased or just as biased. Right. So then they say to me, so we shouldn't get rid of the GRE. Right? So then I'm like, but so I feel like, we make these changes here and here, but then really it's the whole picture that's kind of broken, and we need to just take a step back and think that through, right? But everybody feels like too overwhelmed to think that through. And so I want to ask you, right? Like, if you had that ability, if you had that lever that Chris wants to give you, like, what would you change to make it a more inclusive and equitable system to really have our faculty reflect, society, have our faculty reflect our student body?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, in part because it is true that, for changing something like the way we populate our professoriate, which is essentially what your question is asking, right? Will take more than pulling levers in the way that you're describing. But I do think that there are ways in which we can look more creatively at how we judge, I guess, what I would say potential, which is what kind of graduate school is. And we've gone through a bit of this at MIT, just thinking about a place that, but where tests still reign. Tests is still the anchor of most decisions. But part of just thinking about the GRE, for example, that you described, was the recognition that in the absence of it, in the way you described, everyone was going to even more biased methods, which is generally like their friends, just too much of the circles of we, right? So one of the things that we've thought a bit about is, and I'm not sure how it's done here at Brown, but at MIT there was typically, in the political science department did this, Rick, you may remember this. We looked at the metrics that are used to evaluate a student coming in for a PhD program. Essays, letters of recommendations, GRE scores, and such. And we looked at 1 year where we decided we did the usual way that we did it, which was weighing pretty heavily letters of recommendation and also GRE scores. Then at the end of the semester and end of the year, every department has to do a grades meeting where you look at grades. And we began to see, right, and also that faculty had to rank at admissions kind of a student's number, would get a number. We looked at the number that they had at admissions and how they did. And lo and behold, there were some things that we hadn't expected, which was students who had come from schools that might not have been considered peer schools to MIT did well. Certain number of them, not all, but a certain number, but certainly did as well as those who were coming from what would have been considered sure shots, right? Kind of like, so that started the process of us being less confident in our abilities to kind of know exactly, right? And began to look at, well, what was it about these students that, although not as highly ranked as others, they did better, or as well as, if not better. And then we began to notice that there were certain things in their essays that it showed certain skill sets or certain resiliency or a certain drive that may explain how you succeed in graduate school. So it was a quality. So it wasn't necessarily like, what might be described as kind of pure measures of competence, but it was some other things that results in succeeding in graduate school and life. So anyway, that's just one example. I mean, I'm hesitant to get into those larger discussions. Point taken about what the challenges are. But I would want to be careful about what I say about something like that. You can appreciate that, I'm sure.
Nancy, you had your hand up.
So this is a question. Hi, I'm Nancy Kalick. I teach history and religious studies. This kind of goes back to the previous question and also just the way you answered the last one, which is to say with a certain amount of tact and diplomacy, that is, I think, a skill that has to be learned. And I wonder, you've mentioned a couple of times having to just work around some of the obstinate folks and maybe set them aside, find other allies. Something I struggle with is being accused of being aggressive or, I guess aggressive, no matter how carefully or thoughtfully I try to couch something. There's a sensitivity around hearing a woman speak authoritatively in a certain kind of voice, with a certain kind of body, that doesn't, it's harsh for a lot of folks. So I'm wondering, is that the kind of thing that with age you just stop caring about and working around, or were there specific ways that you decided to wield authority that could sort of forestall those kinds of reactions?
Let's see. So I've kind of dealt with that in a certain way. Look, I would think, at least if I've kind of experienced that, has been, I grew up, there was always a view of, not always, a common view of black women. And it kind of goes in two directions, two stereotypes. It's like we're either super aggressive, like, right? We're going to tell you off and da-da-da-da. Comedies are made about it. Or we're hyper-sexualized. There's something like that. And of course, people would, it's not something that people may carry front of mind, but they may kind of lean on, even if they're not acknowledging it, or just kind of a framing. So, growing up as a young black girl, I kind of was familiar, I kind of grew up with the weight of that, I suppose. But that being said, I would always kind of like be like, but that's not me. One thing about whether I was seen as aggressive or not or anything else, maybe I never knew, right? But here's it. I just thought, I'm just going to be me. I talk like I talk. The way I'm talking here is how I talk with my family, is why I talk in meetings. The Melissa that you see here is the one that is always available. I may be more tactful in certain ways because I think that's important too, to have a certain amount of tact when needed. Right? You want to be, I guess what I've always thought is, you want to be effective, you want to communicate. If people are telling you that they're not hearing you, then adjust, just adjust. Because the goal is to be understood. So if I understand that people don't, because I appreciate if I'm with someone and they're talking a certain way and I'm giving them signals like, I can't hear you because you're doing da-da-da, and they don't adjust, I'm like, well, you're not listening. You obviously don't want to talk to me, because if you did, you would readjust. You would find a way to kind of change your posture. So I think it's a It's a two-way thing, right? I'm responsible. I want to be effective. I want to be an effective communicator. Then that requires that I take some time to learn what will be effective for my audience, know my audience. Similarly, if someone wants to talk to me, I would expect that they would do certain things. So, but if you're in a big room or you're in places where you don't know everyone, my view is always be respectful and as open as possible and hope that you can communicate in ways which are inviting, that calls people in. And then if they want to stay, that's good. If they decide it's, it's not one. But I always think that, because my grandmother would always say, I had to bring in the grandma. She was 100. She died last year, right? Yeah. But she was with me to the end. And she would say to me two things. She'd say, she called me Sweetie Pie. Sweetie Pie, you can learn from anybody. You can learn from anybody. You are no better than, you can learn from everyone has something to teach you. And she said, you can, you catch more, you catch more bees with honey. I mean, you catch more with sweetness. She says, vinegar, no. She said, just be open and nice to people. I try that, Grandma, but but that didn't always succeed. But I liked her spirit of it, which is that, she said, life is hard. And we all, life is hard, Melissa. Just kind of see that too. When she thought I was a little strident, she'd say, life is hard, Melissa, see that too. I said, okay, Grandma.
Carla?
I really loved what you said about leaning in and stepping up with respect to service. And so, in academia, sometimes you get people with a lot of different interests and opinions about service. And so when you're leading a team like that, I'm just wondering, what are the most effective ways to create a mind frame and atmosphere of reciprocity so that everybody feels not just obligated, but motivated to contribute towards the greater good?
Thank you. Yeah, I think a really important thing is to try to stress all the ways in which the group will benefit so that we're all kind of benefiting together. And also that there are ways in which everyone gets something, out of it. Like we're all bettered by the effort. Even if your contributions people may consider them to be small contributions, that in the end of the day, they probably are, they mean more than not. And so I always try to stress the we in things. Like I assume the best. I kind of assume, if you're in a department, I assume we're all colleagues. So when we speak, we all want the best thing. We all have different views about what it means to be the best thing, but we all have the good of the department in mind. We're not or the unit, whatever it is, we're not enemies in this. We just have different views about how we're going to get there, and let's try to see if we can come up with something that we can all live with. And I always try to go for, at least what we can live with, like what is not, people can say, okay. If you can get better than okay, that's great. But in a lot of instances, okay will do.
Yes, Sandra.
For your experiences and insight. I have a question about leadership self-care. Can you provide some strategies for persons so that they can be rejuvenated to continue to do the work?
So, yeah, I think it's, I guess you have to take care of yourself. Right? I mean, like you do. There's no point if you're like completely exhausted. Because first of all, if you're exhausted, you're angry. You're like, you're short of patience. You're like, why am I doing this anyway? I always try to find the joy in something. And if certain things, if it's difficult to find the joy, then sometimes I think, don't think, just do it. There are things that I have to do. There's certain notes I have to do. There's certain activities I have to do. I really don't like doing them. If it was up to me, I'd be like, bye-bye. But I have to do them. So I just think, just do it. Don't think about it. Don't think about how you feel about it. Don't think about da-da-da. Just do it. Get yourself there. Once you're there, then you do it, and then you're done. But I do think you do have to give things some parameters. You can't solve everything. You don't own it. These are collective issues. People are making all kinds of decisions that are going to affect you, but you don't control them. There are things that are out of your control. They just are. So that they are, you just deal with the truth of that and don't let it bother you. So the work is, we all want things to happen. You alone are not the only person responsible. You do your part. So it's part of the self-care is just knowing what you can't do and what you ought not feel responsible for. A lot of times people walk around with emotional commitments and this, and I'm like, I don't know why you're thinking that, because you don't control it. If people insult me or do things, I go, oh, that's your problem, not mine. See you. I don't own that. That's for you. Is that a good answer?
Let me ask another question. So part of what we're trying to do here is, really cultivate a different kind of academic leadership.
Sure.
And especially a leadership that doesn't see traditional divides, right? Whether it's around identity divides or being a faculty member, administration, et cetera. And what we know is some people gravitate towards these jobs for all the wrong reasons.
Right.
And some people do it out of service or out of other commitments, et cetera. And I wonder how you have navigated that, since it's clear you have a set of commitments. And you really have navigated your career to be at the apex of one of the major institutions of higher education in this country. So how have you balanced this?
Thank you. Yeah, I think how I balanced it was to think, I really believe in kind of, some deeper notion of service. I do believe that. And even if I see people who I think don't quite think about it in that way, I think about it, okay, these are Brown, MIT, these are great institutions. And they do a lot of good for humankind. What could be better than working at an institution of higher learning, right? I mean, it's a privilege to be at these institutions. That's how I view it. It's a privilege, and if it's a privilege, then you treat it as such. You treat it with the care and respect it deserves. And if you see people who don't act that way, then you try to, model what is the kind of behavior that you want, what are the goals that you have, how are you going to work in a way that will reach those goals, how can you get people on board to see the value of your vision. Those are worthwhile goals. There are a lot of institutions, when you read the papers today, whether the universities or industries or government even, when things go astray, it's because values have gone astray at some point. Something has gone wrong. Leadership, yes, there are other larger structural issues, but there are also leadership problems. So you want to be the leader who is looking out for the good of the institution and for its mission, and try to hold that dear, because those missions, government, higher learning, or have proven mechanisms, when well led, to improve human existence. Who doesn't want to be a part of that? So if people don't, so I think if you hold dear to that, just kind of believe it. And in that regard, the things that this person does, that person does, the things that go astray, those things are going to happen. But those goals, that they have meaning and have virtue, I think they're worth working towards. So that's how I keep, if there's a North Star there about, working in institutions and being a leader in them, it is that.
We still have a couple more minutes for questions or comments if people have additional questions. Yeah, Jill.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I wonder if you could, without betraying any confidences, describe a real crisis that you as a leader were responsible for handling, what went well, and especially what didn't go well. I think that would help everybody learn a little bit about what it means to really navigate something that's challenging.
Okay. Let's have to think about what I can tailor. So, a decision was made at a level at the Institute, and not at the senior level, but where the senior level we had to decide kind of which way to weigh in on it. And but we weren't as clear in our reasoning as we should have been, and the lack of clarity and kind of a resolve, trying to kind of middle it, get a middle ground, ended up being a messy ground, ended up being like explain ground, ended up being like everyone can impute motives ground. I mean, it was everything that you didn't want, right? And whereas we thought we were conveying nuance, others saw muddling, timidness, indecision, lack of clarity, all the things that, the very opposite of what we thought the decision was conveying, what we intended the decision to convey. So when we look back, kind of figure out where did we go wrong? Like what in the thinking, what in our assessment of the problem did we miss such that our message was so off from because the biggest thing, and this is a particular crisis, but I've seen it just in smaller decisions that don't blow up, Jill, is that whatever you're thinking, the group or me as a chancellor, whatever I'm thinking, there's always the space of how it will land. And the gap, like sometimes it's like you say this, and you anticipate it, and it lands exactly how you want. You're like, yay, right? But when it doesn't, oh man, I mean, it can be really bad, in part because, it's not just a decision, it's the decision, it's your communication of the decision, which has a lot to do with how the decision is understood. But even then, sometimes you can communicate quite clearly what you intended, and how it's understood is completely at odds with what you thought. Even if, at the end of the day, if it's a policy change or whatever it's going to be, chances are you're committed to making that happen. So you're going to have to go through with it, but now you've lost the narrative about the point of the policy change. So then what? Yeah, that's, so what we try to do in those instances, once the dust, so after you clean it up or try to fix it, you have after meetings to figure out, how did that happen? What went wrong? And usually, in the instances I'm thinking about, there was, nuance isn't always it. It works in academia, in a seminar, but when you're having to communicate institutionally, it has to be clear, even if it loses nuances, which in certain ways we think are so important and which kind of are the meat of anything. So that's kind of, so I guess the crisis is being willing to look back after it hurts, because you're like, you're out there, then the blame game starts. Even if you're trying to be supportive of each other, and everyone is, but the truth is, even as, you're thinking about it, you're like, how'd that happen? I didn't do it, right? So then, I didn't do it, that. So it's that, but that's human nature, but, if you've got like good department dynamics, whatever your dynamics or human dynamics are, can kind of weather those kinds of crises, which is why inclusivity, having a healthy environment, you need it not when things are going well, but when they're going badly. because you're going to need to draw on that trust and understanding to help you weather when things get bad. But if you don't have that, you have the deficit of trust, and then you can't recover, because bad decisions or things that are misunderstood only work to make things worse. So, building a strong community, having the values kind of be alive, they work, and you see their value. If you're not convinced of them as a kind of a principled matter, you see their value when things go wrong, you can keep your community together.
Well, thank you, Melissa, for this terrific conversation, and just inspirational talk and incredible example of principled leadership. I know I speak for all of my colleagues when I really want to thank you and how impressive it's been. So please join me in thanking Melissa.
Thank you.
And there are refreshments out back, and we can continue the conversation in a more informal way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.